objectively speaking, we would rather that Obama, when presented with the immense amount of political capital he had at a unique point in time, when there was a renewed hope in the Democratic Party, renewed buy-in to the Democratic Party, and renewed reach of the Democratic Party, we therefore see with that same political capital, we would rather retroactively they had pursued affordable tertiary education in all over the United States. That means things like making state colleges tuition-free. That means including the access programs and path to college programs. That means creating unique systems to go straight from like high schools, which are marginalized and under-resourced and underfunded, to go into affordable colleges and therefore improve the educational opportunities of the students, especially in those districts and in those places that desperately need it the most. We're therefore extremely proud to propose. What do we tell you under OG first? To understand that education is a priori and mostly prioritized. Second, that US politics is far too transparent and fickle to support the would rather want instead. Third, that is an alienated and radicalized election for great harm in this case, and found that their best case is marginal at best and therefore doesn't stand. What do we therefore put to you from our side? One, understand that education is importantly a priori, and this is important because you must weigh this one against all things that they bring forward because it comes first, right? Understand that in this case, college is unique because it literally saturates you with information to the point where your brain is pushed to capacities where never been before, right? Because it inculcates in your practices in you critical thinking faculties that I'm using right now, right? That your ability to like evaluate claims, your ability to think about things from a logical point of view. Third, you're surrounded by incredibly ideologically diverse people and engage with them in the fact that many of these individuals do not have the ability to do so, right? That means they would have been stuck in their rural communities or stuck in their cities, not having talking to people who the social bonds they had formed previously in life. Whereas college resets the context of social relationship making and gives you a new basis on which to create friend groups and circles based on your commonality in the college as opposed to where you came from and exposed to people that otherwise wouldn't happen. And finally, it challenges you on a personal level to adapt to a new situation and challenges you to have personal growth, which is important for the reasons we give to you. Why is this important in this degree? Because understand that in a moment when you don't have an educated populace, when you have a populace that's deprived of quality tertiary education, they're easily susceptible. Things like this healthcare is socialist, and therefore you shouldn't go for it. These people are coming in to take away the things that you have, and other fear-mongering tactics that used so effectively in the past election, right? To completely take over the discourse that exists, and because they don't have the ability in this case to evaluate those claims objectively as a matter of whether or not they're actually being used or abused, right? We said that in this case, this goes further. That means that the healthcare being passed is contingent in this case upon those voters being able to fight back against misinformation campaigns, which we've seen to great extent in the past election, and that's what have created a far different outcome, right? Before we move on, take it home.
Okay, how is healthcare conceived as socialist, but free college?
So here's the thing, right? Understand that what they want in this case, when we want, for example, right now, if you were to go into like Cuomo and say we want like a college free in New York University, no one's going to call that person socialist, right? Because understand that this is an impact of labeling and the impact of optics, right? Understand in this case, it is far more difficult when there hasn't been like years and years of like Red Scare, years and years of McCarthyism, which pointed directly to healthcare and not to education, right? Because we can frame this as an affordability of education and also the ability to give them what they deserve. We therefore see how that point doesn't stand in this degree. Therefore, we've gone to why it's essentially a priori to functional democracy, right? Because your ability to evaluate claims better, your ability to verify your claims better, improve the ability to which you can engage in the political process as an informed and active voter, right? This means that college, especially because the people in college tend to be really politically active in the first place, right? That means there's clubs on campus like college Democrats, college Republicans, and people that push you towards positions that you otherwise wouldn't have been. That means, after being politically activated in this case, the quality of discourse improves after you have had the college experience, right? That means you can engage and talk to people without vilifying them in that case, without having to like treat them as villains for not agreeing with you, because in this case, they were just your roommate the very last year, right? Sophomore college, you had a roommate who directly didn't agree with you in this case. We therefore see that in this case, you must prioritize education in this instance. We therefore see the alternative in there. What actually happened is that US politics was far too transient and fickle for healthcare to be passed successfully. That means there's a rapid flip-flop in American elections in very short periods of time. That means there's a shift of the center of discourse and what the topic of the day is because of the rapid nature of discussion, the rapid nature of the news cycle. We see that the new administration campaigns itself on undoing the work of the administration before it, right? That means to have this education, have this healthcare passed, you must have to protect it from the replace and remove strategy of the Republican obstructionists that exist in American politics, right? That means that in this case, even if they get to some degree, they'll repeatedly bad drawbacks and repeatedly. Why would this happen? Is essentially to education, because one, it isn't tied to hardcore topics like retirement age and the social security, right? That means it doesn't affect like key button issues to do, for example, older voters, for example, older demographics, and again, they would rather want, in this case, for people to be educated. Second, it is palatable to the right wing because it can be framed in a way to boost healthcare, boost jobs, boost things like if businesses having access to a hireable market of like labor force, all these will make it more palatable to reach across the aisle and make that on the side. And finally, we show that it's harder to poke holes in a strategy, right? Because it's hard to provide exemptions, and this exemption is essentially what doomed this plan to fail, right? What do we mean by this? What we mean that they have, in the failures of this policy, as happened in reality, have alienated and radicalized the election to irreparable degrees, right? That means what Obamacare did is to have punitive fines for people who couldn't even afford to have that education. The policy was flawed to begin with. We saw that in this case, the punitive fines ostracized people in the working class, ostracized the rural populations, people who are then pushed away from the Democratic Party, pushed away from engaging in politics from a rational point of view, pushed away from engaging and giving like the benefit of doubt to the other side, making it a far more toxic form of this what they engage in, and a far more individualistic and nativist sort of politics that they engage in later on. And we said that this is a fatal loss of voters in swing states and a fatal loss of voters only amplified by the Electoral College and making it much harder for the Democratic Party going forward, right? To win back those people that were hurt, that were lost by the plan that the opposition once portrayed. We see that therefore, at best, marginally, their healthcare is always going to fail because you can always poke holes in it as you can with education. We say that you can say that menstruation, for example, as Republicans put it, is a pre-existing condition, and therefore insurance, which is also going to help you buy female sanitary products, right? In this case, that means you can also poke holes in it and make it not serve individuals and demographics that are not politically active. We said that in regards to education, this is specifically more broad, specifically more important, and is specifically a priori to all other claims and all other priorities to getting good policy of any kind, right? So therefore, seeing how it's more important, seeing how we cannot afford to lose it, and seeing how it's harmed so many amounts of people, we are very proud to propose.
Thank you to the Prime Minister for your remarks. We now invite the Leader of Opposition.
The job of the opening government was not to prove why higher education is important. The job of the opening government was to prove why higher education is important relative to the massive amounts of death and extreme debt that was imposed on families as a result of a lack of access to health care. Multiple individuals, I should note on the comparative, are forced to leave college because of the debt they accrue as a result of not being able to pay for health care that is either one, denied by their pre-existing conditions, or two, denied by the severe lack of income and extraneous income that they're allowed to use to pay for that health care. Three things in the speech. First, some extraneous rebuttal that doesn't fit within my speech. And then second, a comparative policy benefits argument. And then third, a political comparative on the debate, and then talking about benefiting discourse. First, on the extraneous rebuttal. This is susceptible to sabotage. Wow, I wonder if maybe it was susceptible to sabotage because Obama was A, black president, and B, a Democrat who was doing something that would have benefited the majority of the nation. I posit to you that no matter what Obama would have done, that is proposed higher education, or simply breathed on a member of Congress who wasn't a Democrat, they probably would have tried to impeach him in the first place. The fact of the matter is that on the comparative, it's actually far easier to poke holes in education. Why is this? It took years of Supreme Court cases, systematic destructions of states' rights, and pulling funding from multiple different kinds of infrastructural institutions to destroy healthcare. All you need is a Senate vote to take away funding for higher education access, and you kill any effort that you have to try to increase higher education on the status quo. So on the comparative, I think it would have been a lot easier to sabotage higher education just by the way that political structures work. Second, this is going to be perceived as socialism, and they go, aha, well the reason this won't be socialism is because we're proposing a free degree. Yeah, key word, free. This is the United States. Anything that is free but you use a collective pool of resources to pay for is definitionally socialism in the minds of Americans, even though they're fucking wrong about that all the time. So, just on the comparative based on the most important points you presented in your second argument are flat out wrong. But if that's not enough for you, let's talk about comparative policy benefits. Why don't we care about higher education relative to the benefits of healthcare access? The first is because a higher degree doesn't mean you get the guaranteed benefits of that degree relative to accessing markets. The first thing is because it requires those degrees to, the degrees required required to access the market are things like tech, there are things like engineering. They are pushing past the forces of automation and manufacturing exports to make sure that people can actually get a job where they're coming. There's a reason that the amount of degrees that people are getting are increasing in liberal arts degrees that don't pay anything, and people are forced to work at McDonald's once they get out of college, right? I would secondly say that just because you go to college doesn't mean you think for it. And I know this is a controversial point in this community, but we're going to go for it. I would say that universities are becoming far more ideological and liberally tilted towards trampling on the rights of free speech and individuals. Talk about the way that we implement things like safe spaces. Talk about the way that we shut down and literally fight journalists to push them off the campuses to cover the issues that are the most important to students. I don't think that all liberals are trying to shut down free speech. That's not my argument here. But just based on the universities that are attending this very debate tournament and the policies that they implement in those individually represented universities, doesn't mean that ideologically tilted professors that tell you why you should subscribe to Marxism means that you're thinking more. You can get that literally anywhere else, like get a job, for example. But why is that not enough for you? We think healthcare is a comparatively important benefit on a policy level because a lack of healthcare access literally destroys the country. How does it do that? The first thing is when you get sick and can't pay for healthcare. What do you have to do? The first thing you do is you attend more doctor's appointments because you have less time to be able to dedicate to your job, which often results in you getting fired. When you don't have a job, pretty simple. You can't pay for food on the table. You have to subscribe to welfare services that are woefully insignificant in order to account for the vast varying different socioeconomic statuses of people across the United States. The second thing you have to do is trade things off. This is the argument about how people that I literally know had to drop out of college at the University of Alaska because they got a healthcare impediment on them that A, wasn't covered by their pre-existing condition, but B, once Obamacare came into effect, they still weren't able to pay for it, so they've been out of college for 3 years. That person was probably going to become an economist for the state of Alaska, and now they can't. That really sucks. But second of all, debt forces you to do things like sell all of your assets. It makes it far more difficult for you to save. That means you buy less houses. That means you purchase less products, which stops productivity in the economy, which contributes A, to our overall GDP. Second, wage growth and oh my God, people get paid more. That's what I'm trying to say. All of these things happen as a result of not really being able to pay anything, because you are saddled with debt that affects a vast majority of consumers and individuals across the free market. The third is that the winnings typically based on magnitude. Healthcare access affects more people than lack of education access, right? Not only does it affect the young people who are the most significantly less inclined to be able to deal with that lack of access, but it also affects old people. We're going to talk about why that increases the political capital to pass healthcare reform comparative to education later, but just based on numbers and things, we're probably winning. In terms of length, yeah, people dying is one benefit we get. But in terms of people not being able to deal with healthcare access, the sicker you get without being able to treat it later makes it far less likely that you can treat those sicknesses and actually cure them. So once you're sick at the age of 20, if you don't get that treated by the age of 35, you're probably a lot likely to die in 20 years. So, just based on whether or not healthcare is comparatively more important than education, we think we're winning. Before I move on, CL seems frustrated. CG.
Wonderful. Don't you think it were the case that minorities and the poor could actually access decent jobs because they had an education? Maybe they'd be able to afford healthcare in the future.
Yeah, I'm really surprised by your inability to listen here. First 30 seconds of the constructive point was how it requires you to get degrees that actually enter you into the job market. If you go to college, remember the model that you do not get to fee on this. The model did not say we're going to give people education and make them get an engineering degree, or help them with coding and JavaScript and whatever the hell you guys do. So if you don't do that, you literally don't get access to the job markets. They're getting exported, automated. You lose out on that. Comparative political benefits, and this is the reason solely alone that you should pass this, by the way, just based on the policy benefits. But we say it would never would have gotten passed in the first place. Why? It has to do with political persuasion. We think that most people perceive higher education to be an increasingly liberal institution. Even if you don't believe by substantive analysis as to why that's true, it's about what people perceive. Parents usually don't think that higher education is necessary. Older people, at age 35 and up, they say, go get a trade job, learn how to become a plumber. There's plenty of jobs available. Our parents all told us this before we came to university. Remember that. Those are the people with the finite amount of political access to contribute to campaigns, and the people who are far more likely to be pandered to by politicians. What that means is that you never get that passed, especially when you have a GOP Congress that was dominated the House until 2014 and then dominated the Senate once we kicked out Democrats like Mark Begich. When that happened, you had no possibility of passing that because people simply don't perceive it as important, and the added fact that it's still a socialist program. Why was it easier to pass healthcare? That's because there was demand from the vast majority of the population to increase healthcare reform. We were crying out. People were crying out because people are losing their lives and their jobs and everything they had because no one could pay to cure their fucking sickness. As a result of that, that, those families were broken. The destruction of communities and entire economic systems here in the United States and individual states created the demand to do it. The fact of the matter that was bipartisan, which was that Democrats and Republicans agreed on that, is what was able to get Obamacare passed. Remember, sabotage is not enough of a comparative excuse not to pass it. We think they would have destroyed Obama's policies no matter what. We see how that existed for the rest of the administration. But thirdly and finally, John's going to talk about this more, this increases the conversation towards universal health care. Bernie Sanders was only able to garner so much support because we had Obamacare first. People can't make those large leaps and comparative steps towards socialism if they don't have an intermediary step. You'll never get that with education. It's far better to give people health care, make sure they can live, breathe, and get votes passed in the Senate and the House. We're very, very proud to oppose.
Thank you to the leader of opposition. We now turn to the Secretary of Finance.
Speaker, I regret the fact that Obama, for 8 long years, prioritized his legacy over his people. I regret the fact that opening opposition doesn't understand that the Affordable Care Act is a travesty of a policy that has only ever been justified as a stepping stone to something better, that we've been given no hope or reason to believe that we will ever achieve. Speaker, I regret the fact that they think that Obamacare has saved hundreds of millions of lives and hundreds of millions of dollars of debt because it's a bullshit lie and it's what their entire way is predicated on. So here's what I'm going to tell you in this debate. First of all, the fact that education can be construed as a socialist project is not the same as the idea that it will be. There are a couple of particularly unique things about healthcare that made it carry through the election as a particularly radical ideology in the general between Hillary and Trump, right? So first of all, education is just generally something that people view more positively, right? So in terms of the fact that healthcare is viewed as a restriction of the free market, which is a violation of the core tenet of the Republican Party, that this kind of universalized healthcare is necessarily seen as that kind of restriction, whereas this is functioning in terms of state schools and sort of path-dependent programs that get you into other schools more affordably. That the sort of we can access the kind of arguments in terms of bettering the economy through education means that all of this is more sort of relatable and sustainable with the Republican core tenets of its principles in any way. So in other words, what I'm telling you is that affordable education was a divisive issue and is a divisive issue within the Republican Party and the status quo. In other words, there's a large portion of the Republican Party that is perfectly happy with affordable education. They just don't necessarily see it as a public policy priority, which is why it's not a voting issue for them. This doesn't mean, however, the Republican Party writ large is opposed to affordable education. Demonizing it then actively alienates parts of your voter base and is not politically tenable. What this means is that even though it may have been opposed at first, which I'll argue in a second wouldn't have been the case under the Obama administration, the kind of mediatory and radicalized rhetoric into the future is not what we would have seen in the ensuing election. Also, generally speaking, when these kinds of spending projects when Democrats occur that don't necessarily clash with core tenets of Republican values, what happens is they oppose the spending until the point that it happens, and then when benefits materialize, they're willing to let it go and fade into the enigma because it's not particularly important to their voting base anyway. So then, what I'm telling you secondly is that it's not unreasonable to say, or rather that it is entirely unreasonable to say that this would not pass through the Obama administration. I say that what they're telling you is that they had bipartisan support for this in Congress and in the Senate under the Obama administration. The reason for that was there's a far less radicalized Congress, generally speaking, under the Obama administration. Warren and I have talked to you about why specifically the passage of the healthcare policy has radicalized Congress and the executive branch, since that means that their analysis is based pretty much entirely on the idea that while this may not pass now, it wouldn't have passed then. I think it's perfectly reasonable to believe that if we have the political capital to pass the Affordable Care Act, we've got the political capital to make education more affordable for all of the reasons that I've listed so far. Then they tell you that going to college doesn't make you think better. I think that this is lazy argumentation that's based on sort of appealing to your own cynicism. I think that it's a perfectly reasonable thing to say that going to college generally makes you a smarter person, is more able to critically think, right? I think that that's on face true. And then I'm going to talk to you about why that's incredibly important. But first, let's talk about why the Affordable Care Act was a failure of a policy. So first of all, there are still millions and millions of people uninsured. The marginal benefit of the Affordable Care Act has meant that the kinds of economic doomsday arguments that they give you are either, number one, still possible at this point when all of these people are still uninsured, or second of all, not likely to materialize to begin with. For the punitive fines punitive fines associated with the Affordable Care Act aren't many of those with the least resources. And moreover, this is not affordable health care. This is affordable health insurance, and that's incredibly important to the extent that, like, even when you are insured under United States health care, there are an incredible list of conditions and medications and like doctor's visits and everything that are still completely outside of your reach, that still put you in debt. This is a completely different thing. And while repeal and replace has not been completely effective, Republicans have been since rolling back the conditions that were originally applied to what can and cannot be pre-existing conditions, everything from menstruation to heart disease, right? So a host of uncovered medical conditions mean that the policy has also failed those people who did get health care, which means that all of their impacts are severely mitigated. But beyond that, they say that this is justified as a step in the process towards universal health care. The problem is that U.S. politics are transient and fickle, right? We don't have decades to get this policy passed. We're not going to see the kinds of social change that they want to see. If anything, what they're telling you is that this allowed for Bernie to happen is a silly argument. Because number one, he lost the primary election. Number two, we've seen the most radical right-elected politician in recent U.S. history as a direct result afterwards. I don't know why we're saying that we have some kind of political momentum towards the liberal left just because Bernie existed and got a platform for a bunch of us college students, which was his primary voter base. Probably links back to the idea that a well-educated voter base is probably more able to self-advocate for things like affordable health care. Then, I tell you that we go as far as to say that this prioritization actively regress the choice of the chance of effective healthcare policy, right? That like the huge topic of the general election, every congressional election since was based on repeal and replace. That this was like a voting issue for a vast majority of Republicans. So in other words, this specifically activated and radicalized the Republican Party in a way that I explained to you that education wouldn't have done the same way. But here's the problem. Even if you believe that a college education would always be stigmatized in the same way, understand that our policy is not a decades-long process. Our policy is not path-dependent on the intransience of U.S. electoral politics. What we're telling you is that these kinds of policies are sort of like single-step issues that allow people to access education, and that means that we have, at the very least, even if it is like as politically intense, we have meaningful change into the future. But then also we tell you that like beyond that this is important because when we have that kind of meaningful change, this is like a priori to a functional democracy. That is to say that any good policy change is predicated on every individual's ability to self-advocate and meaningfully engage with the political system. If we can prove to you that there is a relatively increased number of people that are able to do that, then that means we have a better functioning democracy, a better chance for better healthcare, fiscal, and every other kind of policy into the future, and a more active and engaged voter base. What I'm telling you then is that if you believe that going to college probably makes you smarter, if you believe that the Affordable Health Care Act is a failure and is not likely to get any better in the near future, then what I'm telling you is that the thing that we need to do fundamentally is fix our democracy. The thing that we need to do fundamentally is make people on Comparative less manipulable by politicians who want them to vote against their self-interest. What I'm telling you then is that the sort of like a priori issue in this debate is education. To the extent that I can prove to you that a good education is linked to your ability to critically think and self-advocate, that your ability to activate those skills is always related to your ability to vote in your own self-interest, then I'm telling you that every policy decision, including affordable health care, the impacts that they outline for you, are more likely to happen in the future with a more well-educated populace. Thanks.
Thank you. To the Deputy Prime Minister, we now invite the Deputy Leader to the floor. Here.
Look, me and Robert have two essential positions in this debate. The first is that healthcare benefits more people on net than education ever could. And the second is that we have better political mechanisms to access change in healthcare than we did in education. The Deputy Prime Minister tried very hard to push back against that. We're going to respond. Two things in my speech. Firstly, I'm going to tell you broadly about America, why this is better than for Obama's relationship with America and that administration. And secondly, I'm going to talk to you about young people and how even in the best case, when we're only talking about young individuals, healthcare will be better for those individuals than education. First, 3 points of deconstruction. First on this, Obamacare didn't do anything. Look, Obamacare wasn't the best policy that it ever could have been, but I'll give you two very good examples of how Obamacare tangibly made money in people's lives better. First, a Medicaid expansion so low-income states can access that Medicaid definitely saved individuals from health issues and maybe even saved lives, actually definitely saved lives, and we can't put numerical values to that. But secondly, it took away many of the barriers that existed for pre-existing conditions that didn't allow people to access healthcare previously. We think those two things take away that Deputy Prime Minister argumentation, right? But the second thing that they tell us is that lots of political barriers existed to making Obamacare better, right? So this argument was basically, because of like discussions in Congress and Senate, Obamacare wasn't the best it could have been. Like, look, this is going to exist in their policy as well. They say, oh, there's going to be all these barriers that exist to making like healthcare the best, but we're just going to instantly pass free college for everyone, right? Understand that their free college is going to have the same kind of compromises that Obamacare had to make it not as good as they would like you to trim it to be, right? But the third thing I'd like to point out is just like, look, and this might be because many people in this community don't spend a lot of time with conservatives, but there's actually a huge conservative narrative against giving people free college. Like, they think all the Republicans love this. There's, like, go on Facebook if you have conservative friends. You'll see a post about, liberal snowflakes want free college all the time, right? This narrative exists, and Republicans are going to pay attention to their constituency, which is growing more and more tired of liberals asking for free anything. On our side of the house, we get some conservatives, because some conservatives get health conditions and think, maybe I do want health care. We don't get old conservatives because they never want to go back to college because they think college is like a liberal ideological paradise. First, let's talk about America. No, thank you, not yet. Three pieces of comparison to tell you why healthcare is more important to America than education. The first is on magnitude, and this is like a very simple argument. Healthcare simply helps more people than education ever could. No, thank you. Think about old people that are never going to go back and get education. Think about people with jobs who, because they have a job, don't have time to get educated again, and probably don't see the net benefit of going back and getting a college degree, right? We help all of those individuals, but also think about the children that are also in educational programs. We help them so that when they get a health problem, they don't have to drop out of college to pay for their health care debt, right? But if magnitude doesn't convince you, think also about guarantee of outcomes, right? We told you already how Obamacare had good guarantees for outcomes and removed barriers for pre-existing conditions and expanded Medicaid. These are guaranteed outcomes to anybody that gets a health problem in the country, right? But understand that they don't necessarily get their guaranteed outcomes on government side. Why is that? Because large educational institutions don't necessarily give you access to capital. That is to say that educational institutions have been terrible at placing people with their degrees into the job market. That means we don't get those kind of impacts that closing government tells us about, which is like, no, send them to education so they can pay for healthcare later. But secondly, even if we just talk purely about the rational thought processes that opening government brought us, we don't necessarily think that this is going to be as good as they want it to be. Like, look, I'm not going to say you're not going to learn how to think better in college, right? But I'm going to mitigate this by telling you it's not going to be this kind of place where you necessarily learn to think better, right? What we would say, Robert told you that ideological institutions have prevented the kind of deep thought and rational decision making to happen. But I want to especially push back against their assumption that political dialogue is going to get better at universities. Because understand there's ideological universities on both the liberal and the conservative side, right? So if you're a conservative, your parents sent you to Baylor to tell you how to teach like a conservative. If you're a liberal, your parents sent you to, like, I don't know, Yale to teach you to think like a liberal. And then people over at Baylor, look, and the students from Baylor and the students from Yale, they both are good rational thinkers, but this doesn't help their political discourse because they're operating off fundamentally different political doctrines. We don't think we get better discussion on their side of the house, right? But the third piece of comparative that comes up in this debate is who actually has an easier way to access political change. The Deputy Prime Minister will respond to a lot by this, right? But our simple argument of why we access political change better on our side of the house is just that more people are invested in the outcomes of healthcare than people are invested in the outcomes of education, right? This is the only reason we think Obamacare was ever been able to pass, because there was people sending letters to the Republican senators thinking like, look, I've been a conservative for a really long time, but these healthcare debts are killing me, right? We don't think that that's necessarily going to be the same on the side of education. And even if it is the same, we think far less people are going to be affected by educational debt than affected by healthcare problems on our side of the house, right? But then opening government gives us this argument where it's like, but it's harder to poke holes in the policy. Before I get onto that, I'm going to respond to opening.
All of your analysis about the political tenability of affordable health care is completely incongruous with the political reality, which is to say that, like large majorities of House Republicans, as well as the United States general election, principal voting issue is the Affordable Care Act and repeal or replace.
Okay, look, repeal and replace was a Republican ideologue when they retained majority in the Senate. They need to tell us why, when Republicans retained majority after the Obama administration passed free education, that repeal and replace wasn't the same narrative, right? If they want to say repeal and replace affected healthcare, it's also going to affect education. Why is it that the Republicans don't come back and repeal and replace their educational policy? That's what they needed to argue, right? But I want to get to opening government's really nuanced argument about why we can't access political change on our side of the house, which is that you can't poke holes in education like you can poke holes in healthcare, like you can poke holes in the failures of Obamacare, but you can't poke holes in the failure of education. I disagree. I think there's many people who are feel disempowered by their degree and end up working in a different sector, and those kind of failures are evidence to them that the educational sector has failed them, and the Republican Party will definitely make them take advantage of those polls. Let's talk about young people, right? And actually, in this point, I want to talk mostly about whether or not young people should focus on healthcare a priori or education a priori, because this is a big point that I think is going to come from opening government and closing government. Opening government tells us that learning rational thought processes is a priori to health. This is ridiculous because you can't focus in your educational classrooms if you literally can't pay for healthcare for some condition that you have, right? You can't get educated if you are unhealthy and saddled with debt, right? We need to make sure that people have access to these kinds of opportunities before we can even put them into an educational system. We need healthy people that actually are secure in their ability to continue to be healthy before we have people that are able to think and learn, right? Closing government's response is like, get money to pay for healthcare later. What closing government wants then is a race against the clock. Basically last long enough without getting a pre-existing condition to get a degree and get a job to pay for yourself. We don't think that that's a safe assumption.
Thank you to the Deputy Leader of Opposition for the remarks. We now invite the member of appointment for the second half of this speech. Here.
Now, opening opposition may have proved the fact that education doesn't help people think more clearly, doesn't help people think deeper, given the extent of the material that we got, which was just a gross straw man of the model from opening government. Here's what I want to do in closing. First, I'm going to talk about why Obamacare was on-face bad, why it made healthcare less accessible. If we can prove this, we hard beat them because their mechanism literally leads to the opposite impact. Then what I'm going to do is talk about the actual problem of the status quo. Why education is inaccessible for those that are poor, those that are minorities. Explain why getting a world in which people can access education is a world in which people access healthcare better than a world with Obamacare. Lastly, I'm going to talk about why affordable education leads to a more robust economy and why that is preferable in outways. First, on why Obamacare was bad. What we hear from opening government is correct. Look, Obama wanted to push for things like single-payer healthcare, socialized healthcare, but conservatives forced him to compromise. And the bill that got through Congress was one that was fundamentally flawed at its basis. This is not a roundabout theoretical conceptions of what Obamacare could have been, but how it played out retroactively in the real world. There were three problems. First of all, there was an adverse selection problem. That is, the pool of people that went into Obamacare were by far mostly people that were sick, people that had pre-existing conditions, people that ballooned the cost of healthcare, and the expectation was that you needed a broad group of people that were healthy to also join to offset the cost of that. But that never happened. What it just meant was that premiums rose massively because there was an inability to get actual people who were healthy to want to sign up for Obamacare when there were other better private options in the market. Secondly, what happened was conservative states destroyed their exchanges. That is to say, what happened is states like Texas and Alabama operated their exchanges purposely ineffectively, the way that Trump is trying to destroy Obamacare now. The idea was, look, we have to do this, but we're then going to do it badly and not going to accept federal money to do it. The impact was that even though they were operating exchanges, literally there was no one in those states coming in who was healthy, and you were unable to appeal to a broad population, meaning that states that already had socialized healthcare, states like Massachusetts that already had this kind of mandate, now we're having to compensate and pay for states like Alabama and Texas, which have purposely run their exchanges badly. So in states that already had accessible healthcare like Massachusetts, you saw healthcare get less accessible. Thirdly, it was bad on face to force people to get healthcare. This is a philosophical problem with Obamacare. What we say is that poor people aren't stupid. What we say is that they ought to be able to allocate money to things that they think are more important. If people were making a trade-off and saying they would rather invest their money into something like education or to starting a small business or something like that, our side of the house uniquely gives them the option to. The mandate forced them to invest that money into healthcare, even though for some people that wasn't necessarily the best option for them. Given that happens, three things. First of all, premiums rise and people couldn't afford healthcare on their side of the house. This just loses opening opposition the round. Secondly, no, we can defend doing things like pushing for an end to discrimination based on pre-existing conditions. This was broadly popular with 90% of the American population, right? The question is, which are you emphasizing as the Obama administration? Not like we're just giving up on healthcare entirely on our side. No. Thirdly, what happens is compromise uniquely allowed conservatives to destroy Obamacare, but there's no way comparatively that they can do that with an education bill. Like, there's no way to operate an exchange ineffectively when you're just giving people financial aid. That's literally a simple model that already exists in the status quo when we're just two-year programs easier, making things like vocational school easier. These are largely the programs that we're supporting. We're not making fucking Yale free, right? We're making like the accessible institutions education better. Yeah, pretty good, right? So what is the problem in the status quo? Three things. First of all, no, education is the mechanism by which people reach the halls of power and the levers of control. First, college degrees are necessary to get even a simple, like any kind of basic, well-paying job in society today. Secondly, there's been a massive ballooning of costs for college. Just look at the way your tuition has probably increased in the last 4 years. Thirdly, way more people want to go to college, meaning that it's far more competitive and difficult to get into it. Note 4 things. One, people aren't stupid. The overall line is literally absurd that people are going to go to college and just major in philosophy and gender studies and never make money. Like, guys, I'm doing that, but most people are smarter than me if they know how to make money off that. And you're poor, you're going to major in engineering or STEM or computer science because those things pay better. That argument is literally contingent on you buying poor people are stupid. Secondly, we can support things like two-year programs in vocational school, which do lead to higher employment. Thirdly, horrible strongman, right? Like, they're like, if you can't afford healthcare, you'll have to drop out of college. Like, guys, if community college is free on our side, because you're paying for healthcare is not a reason why you have to drop out of college, right? Fourthly, no, jobs come with healthcare benefits, right? So if we prove that more people get employed, it's likely that they're going to get healthcare through their employer, meaning that on our side of the house, you're far more likely to see people actually generally get healthcare. I'll take closing if they have PI. I'd love to engage.
Yeah, sure. So, wouldn't you say that more people actually want to be alive than just want to just college?
My entire speech has already responded to that POI. They are less likely that people get healthcare when premiums rise. If people are more likely to get jobs when they have an education, they get healthcare through their employer. This beats that way. But even if that's not true, I actually think this weighing is false, right? Like, I think, look, it's very difficult. Like, it's not as if people are literally dying without healthcare, right? You're still able to go to the hospital. What you do is you just get a lot of debt. So the question then is some people getting debt that they can't afford better or worse than people being able to access education? The question of people dying is not relevant to the round. This is just a simplistic understanding of how this works. Given that that's the case, last thing I want to talk about, I won't be taking you. Last thing, why is this critical to the economy? What we say is that a world in which unemployment decreases to very low rates, a world in which the economy is operating properly, is a world in which people can, one, usually afford to get health care, but also afford all of the other things that make your life valuable and meaningful and worth living. And so what we say is that if we are able to benefit the economy massively on our side of the house, that drastically outweighs the argumentation from them. Given that that is the case, what happens? One, companies are desperately looking for more STEM workers in the United States, more people with high-skilled degrees. These companies right now are moving to places like Europe. And so on our side, I think what you're likely to see is a massive reinvestment by manufacturing and tech companies into the United States where you have people that actually have the skills to work those kinds of jobs. The impact then is that you're far more likely to see investment into things like infrastructure, far more likely to see people actually getting high-paying jobs, not working shitty service jobs or working on zero-hour contracts. And the impact then is that even if it's the case that we have marginally more people with less healthcare on our side of the house, everyone else is probably doing sufficiently better such that you have job creation and things like that, which we think is equally, if not more important, probably also going to play better with conservatives because pro-economy things generally do well with Republican parties. So for all these reasons, very proud to.
Thank you to the member of government. We now invite the member of opposition to the floor. Here's Hero.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a traditionally old-fashioned, I'm going to be talking about economics for most of this debate. So, the first extension is about how economic reforms would be better approached on the House. First, four reasons are for this. First, recognize that healthcare is preventative care. What does this mean? It means we spend less money in the long run if we're making people healthier now. That is, we don't make people less healthy, we don't make people more healthy by spending less on their healthcare now. It's not as if the money you spend on healthcare is proportional to how healthy they are in the long run in that way. What we're saying in our side of the House is that we spend more money on healthcare. That means people are going to be more productive members of society in the future. Second point, this is my second point, which is that healthier people are more productive. This is efficiency wage theory. That is, people are more likely to be able to have jobs in the first place, more likely to be productive in those jobs if they're not getting sick all the time, which means they need to have health care in order to be able to be engaging in these jobs. We think, therefore, we're also getting a better economic benefit out of that. But thirdly, we think, is that the debt is more structured on our side of the house. What does that mean? It means if you take on debt to go to get an education, it's something that you plan for in advance. If you have a medical emergency, this is not something that you plan for in advance, so all the debt that you're accruing is something that's completely random, something who are not predicting it, cannot prepare for it, and therefore going to be hurt worse by the debt that they accrue. We think it's a severe economic harm that they have not engaged with adequately. But fourth, and most importantly here, is that we think that before Obamacare, recognize what the comparative is, before Obamacare, healthcare was horrible, and so horrible that so many people would be screwed over by it, right? A few pieces of analysis here. Recognize that before Obamacare, right, 50% of primary care concerns went to the emergency room because people didn't have access to a freaking doctor because they didn't have healthcare, right? So what does that mean? There are a lot of impacts from this, right? First, I think it's a huge waste of resources insofar as we're spending so much money on people who go to emergency rooms and go to other sources of healthcare besides going to their doctor. We think that therefore there's a huge economic harm there. But second of all, it's a public health issue because people who needed to use emergency rooms, needed to use these emergency facilities, no longer had access to speedy recovery times because now the emergency rooms are flooded with individuals who aren't actually in emergencies. We think that's bad. But third, and importantly here, that it trades off the education spending. That is, we think conservatives are more likely to support education funding in the future if we spend less money on healthcare now. If healthcare now costs less per unit of healthcare, because now individuals in our side of the house aren't flooding emergency rooms. And fourth on this is that we think healthier people in the long run are more likely to get an education. And so far as they now have the ability to receive an education because they have health stability. We think, therefore, that we're going to be winning on this point. But second, the second piece of extension that we're going to give you today is that we think that the federal duty to provide health care is more important than the federal duty to provide education. That education is better handled on a state-by-state basis rather than on a federal basis. This is going to outweigh all the arguments they gave you. So, first, we think that states are better equipped to handle education reform than the federal government, that therefore Obama was correct in prioritizing healthcare as a federal reform under Obama's administration. Think about the difference between California and Wyoming, right? There are huge differences in the demographic makeup of these places, huge differences in the average level of education you need to get a job in these places, and a huge difference in how wealthy these places are, right? Very different places. Notably, people's need to see a doctor in these places is about the same, right? If you get sick in California, you get sick in Wyoming, you need to see a doctor either way. But the amount of education you need to thrive in these places is very, very different. So, especially with education on a state level, and focus more on the national agenda through Obama, because you can pass national reform that will help everyone, while the education reform that you're going to pass is not going to be as meaningful. We therefore think that it's better for you to prioritize your healthcare system. Right? So what does OO tell you? OO says, we need to focus on healthcare because it's going to affect the poorest individuals, right? We think this analysis is correct, but they don't impact it correctly, right? The arguments they give you about how healthcare is going to help people are true, but what they don't give you is how it's particularly bad for the poorest of the poor in which healthcare is most effective, right? Recognize that the poor are most likely to have more dangerous jobs, right? Because there are lower barriers to entry to get these jobs. The poor are also more likely to have chronic illnesses like lung cancer, for example, because they're more likely to smoke. And in general, the poor just tend to get sick more often than the rich do, right? The poor tend to be less healthy because they have less financial resources, and there are a huge amount of barriers that prevent the poor from being as healthy as the rich. What does this mean? They're getting sick more, and further, in addition to this, the second point of this, is that they're less likely to get into college in the first place because of the barriers of lacking education before tertiary school, right? They're less likely to have a good education in high school that allows them to get into good colleges. What does this mean on their side of the house? They're hurting the poor the most because the poor are the most likely to get sick and the least likely to get educated. So you're funding education instead of healthcare, and something that is inverse to what the needs of the poor actually are. We think that therefore their side of the house is not engaging with the political reality of the world, which is that individuals are getting sick and they're not getting help, they're not getting treatment, and many are dying as a result. They don't engage in the comparative, and they have no way of outweighing this, right? As far as people are literally dying due to access to healthcare pre-Obamacare, we think that on our side of the house, we're the only people who are actually making the world a better place in that sense. But I hear opposition.
For as long as our populace is unable to effectively self-advocate, there will always be millions without health care. This means that measured indefinitely into the future, you see less economic harm and less loss of life on our side of the house. That's the way. That's the comparative.
I think the stupidest argument we heard in this debate is that education is a priority, but health is not, right? We need to be healthy. We need to have the ability to go to college before we can get an education. If you're going to rank like your Maslow hierarchy of needs argument, right? Like if I need like baseline needs, like not having tuberculosis before I can go to class, right? This is clearly thing that I think it's just a silly argument. We're clearly going to need something that's more important. It's a functional prerequisite for the enjoyment of education as healthcare. I've given this argument before, and I really think it's a really important argument. It takes out everything we hear from opening government. But on that point, let's talk about more opening government's arguments, right? What else do they say? That's like a one silly argument they give. And then they say, oh, well, free healthcare is socialism, but free education is not, right? I think this characterization is silly. And then what we hear, ironically enough, from closing government is
that, oh, like, they're okay with massive affirmative action programs, but they're also okay by saying that it's good for appeasing conservatives, right? No, pick one. It's either, like, you're rather going to have, like, humongous affirmative action policies in your side of the house so that more people can get an education, or you're going to appease conservatives, but you're sure as hell not going to do both, right? And so that's true. Clearly, there's a huge contradiction on side government, up and down the bench. They're clearly not going to be out. That just makes no sense. But what else do we hear? We also hear from side government that, we also hear that there's going to be, that Obamacare is just a horrible idea. Like, sure, it's not perfect, but recognize what the comparative is, which is that previous healthcare, I give you 4 reasons why previous healthcare options were simply not good enough, especially for the poorest of the poor, who are most likely to die from their illnesses, and who are most likely to get sick in the first place. Insofar as the government has a special obligation to care for the least advantaged members of their society who can't take care of themselves, on their side of the house, people are more likely to get sick and die, or on our side of the house, we make sure the government is fulfilling its obligation, while at the same time making sure that in the long run, there's more economic productivity, and more people have the ability to actually get an education. We're so proud to oppose.
Thank you to the member of opposition. We now invite the government whip for the final speech on the government bench. Here.
Is everyone ready? 2 important pieces of framing. First, on the opening half, we get this debate between like MSNBC and the National Review about the principle of healthcare versus the principle of education. Why is this not the debate? And why is the POI from CO so revealing with their facile logic? When she's like, you need to be alive, you need healthcare to be alive. Look, if we just wanted to advocate for things that were important, why is it that we don't advocate for oxygen to be in the air? Probably because there are no obstacles to you breathing, right? It's not just a debate about what is important and what you need to live. Come on, guys, it's a debate about which of these has more barriers and which of these you need to fight against. So don't just tell me you need healthcare to be alive. Tell me why there are more barriers and why it is the government who is right to fight against these barriers. The second piece of framing is that, look, it's about emphasis. Why are you telling me that one of these is going to disappear and one of these isn't? Like, tell me why we need to prioritize one over the other, why we need to put more time into it, or why we need to talk more about it in public. There are going to be 3 things in my speech. First, why Obamacare on face was a bad policy. The lack of responses from CO, where they just talk about why healthcare is important, doesn't engage with the round because these are contingent on explaining why healthcare was bad. So we actually respond to the real responses that come out of about why they think Obamacare was good, given CO never tells you any reasons why Obamacare was good. That's contingent to access economic benefits, because all their economic impacts presuppose that Obamacare works. Well, I'll give you 3 reasons as well. 2 reasons it doesn't, and a principal reason you shouldn't anyway. The second thing I'm going to tell you in this round is why more people are locked out of education than healthcare, and the third and final thing responds to the CO extension about like states or something like that. Anyway, let's talk about why Obamacare was bad. Robbie gave you 3 things. The first was about adverse selection. Look, you need healthy people to offset this, right? Like a bunch of like people who all need healthcare are the first to go to Obamacare, and these are the ones that are collectivized, then the payout system doesn't work. I'm going to be the first person to explain how insurance works. It's a lot of people who go together, one of them is sick, and the other 9 pay for it. But if 10 sick people go, then what the fuck is going to happen? There are 2 reasons why this doesn't work. 1, these states like Texas intentionally refuse to do things. They break it down between states that are fine, like Massachusetts, have to report it. 2, the people that run to it and support it are the people that need the healthcare anyway. Unsurprisingly, guys, these are the people who don't have as much ability to push for this healthcare policy to work. The second thing that Robbie tells you is that conservative states are going to gut it. This means that Massachusetts is going to be screwed off. On the comparative, we would say that education isn't like this, right? Because states need the help of the federal system to build this up. Massachusetts already had its own healthcare system, but secondarily, it's more collateralized, right? Like, look, if Texas sinks or floats, that doesn't affect California. But if Texas goes down and Texas is helping fund insurance in California, then everyone is together, right? It's like 50 boats that all have a rope that connect them. That is how the insurance system works on their side of the house. That's incredibly dangerous. The third thing that Robbie tells you is a principle that is never responded to, but the paternalizing off. That's like, guys, these poor people don't know what's best for them. Healthcare is so important. We should have a mandate to make them pay for it. We say that they know how to spend their money better, and they think that education is the path to a better life. Let them spend their money that way. No, we'll take you later. Second, why are people more locked out of education? Because OG tells us that cost is a barrier, and they prove this well, but I don't think cost is the only thing and not necessarily the most unique thing. What does Robbie bring you? He brings you a couple of things. One, we would say that while race and gender are tied to income, it is more explicitly a problem in the education system, right? We would say that right now, if you don't have any community colleges, or you don't have state colleges around you, private colleges like Northeastern University that I come from have had a 3% acceptance rate for black students for the past 20 years, and we think that is just unacceptable. Look, this is something that is uniquely only a problem for education because healthcare doesn't check your race, they just kind of accept your money because they're like a corporate business, right? Like that is how it works. No. This cross applies to things like race and gender and things like that we show. Secondly is geography. Look, I was really surprised when I saw what happened in my local high school because the vast majority of people chose to go to colleges that were near them. When I talked to people, what I found out was that while the rest of us have the privilege, or many of us have the privilege, to move around from state to state, lots of people work two jobs, lots of people have to support their family, and they don't have the ability to move. In North Dakota, there is literally only North Dakota State. What does this mean? This means that healthcare is something that people can access because it's not geographically limited here, but in education. If you literally can't go to the college near you and you can't afford it, you're just screwed because you can't go to somewhere else that is more accepting of your identity, right? Like if you're in a conservative place that has no other options, you cannot have the ability to move. Third, debt. I want to respond to this consideration. I'm sorry, sit down. Look, what they tell us is that debt is really, like, healthcare is really bad and we need to pay for it. But I don't think they really understand the impact of student debt. After credit card debt, student debt is the single largest amount of debt in society. Why is this such a problem? One, it lasts forever for some people. After you get a job, the interest rates skyrocket. Two, it ruins your credit score, which limits your ability to do things like get a house. Some jobs actually check your credit score. We check against this on our side of the house because we make it so you can afford college. No, sit. Three, we say that, look, when you have all of this debt, it limits your ability to spend money on other things. Insurance is nice, but you still need to pay for something. We don't think they have the ability to do this. I'll take closing.
Great. We say that the debt accrued from education is planned in advance. The debt accrued from medical emergencies is not what makes it more dangerous. Engage with us.
Look, I don't think that the amount of debt from healthcare is something that compares to the amount of debt in education. That's just like an economic fact. But secondarily, no, dude, what are you doing? Sit. Secondarily, what we would say is that something like education is something that is a prerequisite to all the other benefits, which is the third thing, right? The third thing I want to bring around is all the arguments Robbie bring you that were never responded to about which of these is a prerequisite to accessing the other one. The argument we get from OO is that poor people are just going to study gender studies. Robbie gives you a litany of responses as to why it is a prerequisite to education and advancement. He tells you that, one, the kinds of people who are so on the border of dying with a lack of healthcare that they talk about are likely the kinds of people that know the general statistics of their expected income and what they're going to study. So they're going to choose to use their education to go to the kinds of things that let them pay for healthcare. The other thing he tells you is that, like, just the college degree alone is a prerequisite to a job. The vast majority of Americans actually get their health care from their job. It's one of their benefits. We think that if we improve, like, employment, this makes it so that these people have more ability to access health care through their jobs. What we need to hear from CO at the end of the day is, like, well, one, respond to, like, why Obamacare was bad. Like, give me some arguments. Two, respond to the principle. And three, explain to me on the comparative with all these structural barriers to education we bring you, why healthcare is more important. Very proud to propose.
Thank you to the government whip for that speech. We now invite the opposition whip for the final speech, not only on the bench, but the entire faith in general.
Panel, dead people don't usually attend college and lead the fulfilled, contemplated lives of liberal arts grads that first government would portray to you, or the high-powered engineering careers that second government would portray to you. But Gov says that we can't win on principle because we can't just advocate for oxygen because it's like good, although I would argue that they should refer to the Clean Air Act. So we're going to say that even if you buy absolutely none of our principle, we win on the practical impacts, right? You get greater social benefits, more solidarity for future educational reform, and more solvency for actually passing any reform at all. 3 points of clash. First, that whether education or healthcare has greater social ramifications. Second, what the Obama administration as a specific actor should have focused on. And third, who ought to be most served by the government. But first, I have 2 extraneous points of rebuttal. The rest is going to be irrelevant. So, first, second government says that Obamacare is bad. Because it has too many sick people overburdening the system, and because it constrains choice for poor people. So 3 responses to that. First, no, Obamacare is not perfect, that's not our burden to say, but we're saying that no healthcare system is perfect, and that Obamacare was comparatively the best healthcare plan that we could get passed. We say that it has made people's lives genuinely better because the counterfactual isn't a socialized system of healthcare. We can see that, but that means that the counterfactual is just a private system in which unemployed individuals just can't get treatment. That's kind of bad. Second of all, they say that Obamacare was really bad because it cost too much because sick people wanted to be treated too much. So judging a healthcare system negatively because it treats a lot of sick people who couldn't seek care before is technically bad. We think that it'll stabilize over time because, as my partner brings up, for the first time, individuals without insurance were able to seek preventative care, which actually lowers healthcare costs over time, rather than just going to the emergency room, as 50% of primary care concerns were brought to before Obamacare was implemented. And finally, it raised we say that without Obamacare, you see wasted resources and poor public health. Second of all, they say that education debt is the worst kind of debt. My partner asks this pretty aptly in why. We say that because of the risk analysis, because it's unplanned debt, health insurance debt is actually worse debt. But second of all, we say that healthcare debt is actually worse than any other type of debt because it first of all has a shorter payback frame. In other words, you have to pay all of your debt back in a much shorter period of time. And second of all, it's the #1 cause of bankruptcy in the United States. Okay, moving on into my constructive, but first, opening.
Obama's prioritization can look like campaigning for state legislation, and the vast majority of people aided by our policy will not get TV and can attend college. Warish and I explain differently from them how the ACA has failed more people than this policy ever would, and that's the second way.
So that's literally my first point of crystallization, so I think that's actually perfect. My first point is whether education or healthcare has greater societal ramifications. So, first, government makes this case that college education sort of quells populism because it creates critical thinking, which is how you get the solvency for socialism. I would say that the counterfactual is the system where you see European healthcare is mostly socialized, and it also has the highest rates of populism and radical right party activity in the world. Sweden has a completely free healthcare system, and yet the Sweden Democrats have 25% of the Riksdag, and they're the furthest right party in Europe. So I think that's a pretty good point for our case, that it's not necessary that because people go to college, they don't vote for the frog party. Second of all, we say that in response to closing government's point that jobs provide health insurance, that this isn't enough, that you need health insurance even for those without jobs. We say that this is probably closing Gov's best argument, but recognize that when you become very sick, or a family member of yours becomes very sick, you are likely to lose your job, and lose your job, and therefore your insurance. For example, the Family Medical Leave Act only covers 12 to 16 weeks of actual time off due to illness. And second of all, we say that it's hard for chronically ill people to get a job despite their education because they're more likely to have a spotty work history, so it's harder for them to get hired into those jobs that provide you with health insurance. Okay, closing government also says that college is necessary to get a good job. We say that the average plumber makes more than the average professor, so that's totally not true. Okay, so what do we bring you, and what does opposition bring you as a whole? First, opposition does a fairly decent job of explaining why healthcare has such extensive ramifications. They prove that you need to be healthy to have a job, and that benefits the entire economy. We impact that out in a few really key ways. First of all, we provide the historical context. We say that this is particularly important because Obama was elected during one of the worst recessions in the United States history, and that improving the economy was particularly important for that region. Second of all, my partner brings you 4 key reasons why healthcare is a necessary prerequisite to education and is necessary. First, he says it's a public health issue, using the emergency room as primary care distracts from other public health emergencies and is also just a waste of resources because emergency rooms aren't set up to deal with basic common colds, needing your kids' school insurance forms filled out, all of that. He also says that healthy individuals can undertake risky decisions more often, which is really important because college only benefits you if you graduate, right? Recognize that if you don't have the chance to graduate because you have to don't have the opportunity to actually reap the benefits of that college degree, and you actually incur a cost because the opportunity cost of having not held a job for all those years. We say that when you're guaranteed that you're going to be healthy and you're not going to have to take a leave of absence because you know that you're not going to get sick and then not be able to afford to come back to school, you're more likely to be able to go to college. And finally, my partner brings you the point that college graduates are generally more liberal overall, which means they're more likely to be the group that advocates for healthcare reform in the future. So, for educational reform in the future. So that it's actually better to get individuals who can go to college, who will then advocate for educational reform in the future because they can afford it. Okay, so moving on to the second point about who ought to be most served by the government. So across the government bench, you see this sort of fallacy that education at the college level serves everyone. We think that this is false for two reasons. First, you need to go to a good high school. Second of all, you need the ability to forego the opportunity cost of otherwise being an earner those 4 years. Oh, and you also need to be able to want to go into a career that necessitates college. So we think that answers pretty much all of the concerns across the government bench about whether or not healthcare education serves more people. We bring to a Rawlsian principle of government, wherein those with the least ought to be served the most because of the virtue of their disadvantage, because the United States vowed unto its citizens a certain standard of life and is most acutely breaking that promise to the worst off. For example, we see black women facing a much higher rate of mortality than white men because they are less insured. We say that for all these reasons, because the Obama administration has the political advocacy to pass healthcare reform at the national level and states can pass educational reform at the state level, we win this debate. We create the best society.